Does this sound familiar? People are not having children because they're worried about the state of the world, about climate change, about governments that push a babies at all cost agenda only to leave parents in the dirt when it comes to the nitty-gritty of actually raising a child. Some people call this being child-free by infliction, and it absolutely happens. There are people who have decided that, even though they wanted children, they will not have them because of external circumstances. But it turns out it's less common than we are often led to believe. I didn't want children for the first 35 years of my life. I count myself as socially aware, environmentally minded, politically frustrated, and not exactly the most wealthy person. These could have been major reasons why I didn't have children. In a small part, they were. But they were not the main reason that I didn't try for children. I didn't try because I didn't, at that point, want them. And I'm not the only one. This is what the data has to say. A 2024 Pew Research study reveals that in women under 50 who are unlikely to have children, both by choice and circumstance, the majority, 57%, say the main reason is that they just don't want them. In adults over 50, for those who didn't have children, that turns 57% into 77%. Concerns about finances, the state of the world, and the environment came lower in both groups. Interestingly, in the over 50s, those who did want children but never had them, the biggest reason, 39%, was that it just never happened. The report does not mention environmental or political reasons at all for this subset. So the idea that people who want children are not having them because of environmental or political reasons is, in most circumstances, not entirely accurate. Neither is the idea that people who say they don't want children would change their mind if it wasn't for environmental or political circumstances. This is important because when we talk about external circumstances for not having children, it makes some big assumptions. It assumes that having children is still the default human setting, that if we removed all external obstacles like finances, environmental impacts, the state of the world, many people who previously said they didn't want children would have them. By extension, this assumes a you want them really attitude, which any child-free by choice person will tell you is incredibly frustrating to encounter. It also assumes that people who want children are refraining from arguably one of the most socially acceptable things to do in this world because of external circumstances. This can be true, but as the research shows, it's not as common as many of us think. On the flip side, you can also argue it assumes parents don't care about the state of the world as much as the child-free. If they did, why would they bring kids into this mess? And yet, I know plenty of parents who are environmentalists or work for charities in war-torn countries or join protests to protect human rights. I know parents who are deeply worried about climate change and do their part to reduce their contribution. I know parents who are completely awake to the state of the world, but they still made that choice to have children. This isn't to say external issues don't play a part in the decision to have children. They absolutely do. It's also likely to become more of a factor as time goes on. That Pew Research study revealed that 13% of people over 50 said the state of the world was a reason they didn't have children. That jumped to 38% for those under 50. And there's certainly evidence to suggest that external factors have a big part to play in the size of families people choose to have. One-child households are on the rise, and environmental and financial reasons are often cited as to why. 23% of British parents, for instance, say they want to have more children, but they're unlikely to do so because of external circumstances. This makes sense. In this world of prohibitively expensive childcare, a lack of support, climate change, and a political environment that seems intent on destroying itself, 1 or 2 kids is a more sensible decision to make than having 3, 4, or more. But I'm not as interested at this point in how the external factor argument affects people who wanted children but had fewer than expected. I am more interested in how it affects people who never wanted children and the perceived validity of the reasons that they give. When I was child-free by choice, it was hard to answer people who asked me why I didn't have children. Sometimes I would use the external circumstances argument. It felt easier than saying, I just don't want them. When I said it was because I didn't want them, I heard the usual shtick. I distinctly remember a customer of my wine store telling me that it was a selfish thing to do. Others chuckled at my naivety, confidently declaring I would change my mind, and annoyingly, they were actually right. These judgments are reported everywhere. Article after article documents how people feel judged by their lack of children and the reasons that they give for this. There is even corroborative research about this. One study by Queen's University Belfast set up conversations with Child Free by Choice in their social groups to find out how they talked about their child-free stance. Whilst 80% of them did say they simply didn't want children, which further supports those Pew Research findings, they also saw accounts of people privately knowing that they didn't want children, who in these situations implied otherwise. This was especially true with family members who were quite demanding or questioning of the child-free stance, and that's quoted from the study. In other words, it's not easy to admit that you don't want children just because you don't want them. This throws the external circumstances argument into an interesting light. If people feel uncomfortable saying they don't want children just because, is it such a stretch to say they sometimes hide behind the arguably more acceptable reasons of climate change, politics, and finances, especially when it can certainly be a factor in their decision making anyway, so they're not telling the truth? When my husband and I would occasionally visit the idea of having children throughout our 20s and early 30s, we worried about what sort of world we would be bringing a child into. But that wasn't the main reason that we didn't have them. Time and again, we just decided we didn't want them. The Child Free by Choice are still a relatively understudied subset. Psychology professors at Michigan State University say they're often lumped in with non-parents of all circumstances. They're doing work to change that, and they study the child free in their own right, which is great. But it's why the external circumstances argument is so interesting. Quite often we ask the wrong question. So many studies and surveys I've looked at ask people without children, what are the reasons that you don't have children? If someone asked me that question when I was child free by choice, I would absolutely have chosen external circumstances as one reason, because it was. But that's not the most accurate question to ask. You would be better off asking, if you were child free by choice, if we lived in a world which wasn't a mess, we didn't have climate change, you were financially comfortable, would you change your mind and have them? I would love to see how many people truly are child-free by infliction. Any data that helps society better understand the child-free by choice, their motivations and their reasons, is a good thing. Because it's only once we truly understand real motivations that we can begin to set aside judgments and assumptions and swap them for understanding and empathy. And that, my friends, is a win for everyone, child-free, parent, or other.